All right, hello everybody. Welcome back to CHRTC 309, Sociology of Youth and Religion. All right, so in this lecture, we're going to keep talking about parents here a little bit, and we are going to be talking about specifically parental religiosity and its relationship to youth religiosity. Okay, so most of the data that we have, in this section comes from this paper by Pets. So, what do we know? I mean, when it comes to young people, right, adolescence seems to be a really key time in the development of religious identity. It's also a period of a fair bit of instability, right? And this is to be expected when we're talking about adolescents. In general, what we can say is that their life is pretty unstable, right? And their identity is pretty unstable. They're going through this period of separation from parents, and you know, during this period, um, they can choose either to go with what their parents have kind of instilled in them, go against it. It's a period where they have a lot of choices to make. Okay, so adolescence is key, right? Generally, if one acquires a religious identity in adolescence, one will have a religious identity. If one does not, develop one or rejects a religious identity, that's mostly where we're going to be throughout life. Now, I mean, obviously, and I think this kind of sits with what Dean was saying in the previous section, those raised in religious families are far more likely to be religious than those raised in non-religious families, right? Religious socialization matters here, right? And what you're taught is going to affect you long term. If you're never socialized religiously, you're just never going to learn it. Okay, so I mean, that's, I think, pretty straightforward. I don't think there's anything terribly surprising about that at all. Um, that said, studies suggest, for the most part, when we do kind of the big analyses, the meta-analyses, that those who live with married biological parents are the most likely to be religious. Now, again, I don't think this is overly surprising. People who are married, the people who get married now are much more likely to be religious than people who are secular, who are much more likely to simply cohabit. Again, that's not the case for everyone, and certainly people do eventually get married sometimes, but much more likely. Um, Divorce is less common in people who are religious. Again, not unheard of. It does happen, but less likely. And marriage is really a key value in a lot of religious communities, right? And maintaining marriages and more to this marriage is somehow a function of a relationship with the divine than simply it's a contract for the benefit of both people. As one couple that I had seen in a wedding, their vows, I think, was as long as love lasts, right? We will be together as long as love lasts, right? And that's a more kind of typically cultural way of thinking about it. Okay, so when we talk about religious transmission, obviously what we mean, and we talked about this, I think, in the section with Dean, um, religious transmission is the ability of families or groups to perpetuate their religious beliefs across generations. Now, when we talk about family and how family plays a role in this, most of the research has been on married, divorced, or remarried families, right? We don't have a ton of information yet, say, on same-sex families. Single parent families are, again, a little bit understudied, though the research is certainly getting there. There's diversity of data, right? I mean, mostly what it shows in any case is that married biological families or two-parent families are more effective at passing on faith, but the bulk of the studies suggest that married biological families, right? So both parents are related to all the children in the household, are the most effective at passing on religious faith. It maybe shouldn't surprise us then that in the era where divorce has skyrocketed, that faith has been a much harder sell, and it has become much harder to pass on. Yeah, some studies have suggested it's just two-parent families, right? So two parents in the home, whether they be parents or step-parents. And yeah, I mean, we're getting a lot of new family forms that we don't know much about, right? That we're still kind of learning, and they're relatively novel. Single-parent families, right? Typically single moms, but single dads too. And unmarried parents, right? Cohabiting parents who may be unmarried but living together. And what do they kind of do in terms of religious transmission? So for those of you who are, sociology students, this will be easy. For others, maybe this is new terminology. But in sociology, we talk about two types of socialization. So we've got our primary socialization, which is the first socialization that occurs for human beings, right? And this happens in the family, right? This is your parents or your parent and your siblings, right? Basically, that's where you get your formative experiences is within that context. Secondary socialization is the process of learning what's appropriate as a member of a smaller group within a larger society, right? Now, the most common secondary socialization agent is school, right? But anything, religious communities can be agents of secondary socialization, daycares, day homes, any other kind of institution that people encounter. But it takes place outside the home. Okay, so one of the key kind of sociological theories about how we acquire our social skills is what's called social learning theory. And basically, social learning theory suggests it's pretty simple and straightforward. That human beings learn, that what they learn, the way they learn, is by observing and imitating role models, right? Now, the principal role models that people will imitate for at least their formative years is their parents. So what Pett suggests is that religious behavior is similar, right? Young people seem to learn religiosity by looking at and imitating their parents, right? So you are, in a sense, what your parents are in a lot of cases religiously. Now, again, that's not to say that people don't reject their parents' identity. It's just the socialization into religious behavior comes from your parents. And so they shape you in major ways. Okay, so spiritual modeling then, what does this look like? Well, youth develop spirituality by modeling the spiritual behavior of the important people in their lives, right? So, I mean, in a lot of cases, socially, is you get what you are, right? As a parent of children, you get what you are. Are you devout? Are you, practicing things particularly frequently? You're going to get a lot of the same thing out of children. Okay, so when it comes to the family types that are most conducive to passing on religious faith, there's a couple of fairly obvious things to note. Married parents, so married parents who live with their biological kids, are more likely to be religious on average. Again, that's not to say everyone is, but if you take a cross section, they're more likely to be religious on average. And this, probably has to do with the religious emphasis on traditional family structure within religious institutions, right? So people who are still getting married and people who stay married, they're probably more religious. It just kind of makes sense. Now, of our other sorts of family types, right, never married, cohabiting, and divorced parents are all less likely to be religious, right? Now, there's a couple of possible reasons for this. It may be that their values are not aligned with those who are religious, right? So people who aren't religious don't see the value in getting married. They're more likely to cohabit and potentially more likely to be divorced. Other kinds of explanations, right? Never married people, cohabiting people, divorced people may feel stigmatized within religious communities, right? Religious communities often have, I think it would be fair to say, pretty high and sometimes very demanding and perhaps unfair standards. And so they can feel stigmatized, right? Okay. But yeah, the lack of religious norms might make people more likely to adopt these family types, right? So your nuns might be more likely to never get married or cohabit. And divorced parents, we know sometimes experience a decline in religiosity, right? And again, this may be about in a sec with their kids of sacred loss, right? They'd invested their marriages with a sort of sacred sense, and when it falls apart, it hurts them very deeply. Okay, so generally speaking, from what the research suggests, married parents are generally more effective spiritual models, right? At least in theory, right? And we never know what's going on below the surface in people's lives, so I don't want to be too definitive about it. But at least in theory, right, they are living religious values out through their marriage, right? They are, whatever it happens to be that those things align with. And again, I don't want to be too definitive at the end of the day, but it's a little bit more likely on the whole. And credibility in religious transmission is really the key thing, right? Young people, as I'm sure you sense or you are yourselves, are very sensitive to hypocrisy, right? So when they detect hypocrisy in their parents, right, they're less likely to imitate those people, right? If what you're doing is credible and you do things that are credible, you're more likely to, at the end of the day, follow that and imitate that, right? Um, Young people want credible role models, right? They want role models that are living the values that they claim to be living. And when people don't, that is immediately noticed. And trust me, I've read enough, in all of the sociology, religion classes that I teach, um, enough comments, enough things in papers, enough discussion posts, and had enough person-to-person discussions with young people to very much be in tune with this idea that, where hypocrisy exists in religious communities and with religious people, it is detected and it is seen with disdain, right? There's no mystery of this at all. Married parents with consistent religious beliefs are able to form a virtuous cycle of reinforcing and reaffirming messages about faith. Right. Basically, you have a couple of things, right? So if you have married parents, they have consistent religious beliefs, they can be reinforcing and reaffirming these messages kind of constantly. Faith is important. Faith is important. Faith is important. It makes your life better. It makes your life better. And, kind of constant repetition of this, in various forms, right? This may be personal messaging, the kind of media they choose, all of these sorts of things, right, are all relatively important. Here's kind of an interesting thing. Even in married families with parents in differing religious beliefs, you have a poor track record of passing on faith. And I think what's pretty evident is that, children will often follow the path of least resistance. So whatever parent is less religious, the children will move to that, right? So this was the story, I guess, of like my wife's family, right? Her mom was Roman Catholic and fairly devoutly Roman Catholic, I would say. And her dad is from the United Church, but I would say a non-attending, non-practicing kind of member of the United Church. Is there any other kind? I'm kidding, but a little bit, but not really. What ended up happening was, the kids in her family just sort of, for the most part, defaulted into this much more dad kind of path, right? A path where there was much less religious intensity, much less religious interest. And it was like, well, it's not important to him. And, this was something that sort of reflecting on it, later on, my wife, sort of said, it was that, with these less important religious models and less consistent religious model, that she and her brothers ultimately kind of veered towards that at the end of the day. And that's sort of what ends up happening in a lot of cases, is young people will go to the least religious parents' beliefs, right? And now if you have like, two fairly devout parents, it complicates things in other ways, right? Obviously, there's not a lot of consistency in the messaging, and the more different the religions are, the more that's going to be difficult. If you have a parent who's non-religious, like my father-in-law, that's going to be much more difficult as well. And all of these sorts of things, right? These are all going to make things a lot more difficult at the end of the day for religious transmission to be really effective, right? Consistent messaging from a single faith is going to be better than, consistent messaging from two faiths, and consistent and inconsistent messaging from two different faiths, right, is ultimately very troubling. Okay, now, strong parent-child relationships also improve the odds of religious transmission. And one of the things we know is that married parents have more time to spend with their kids. Why? They have more resources, right? They bring more resources to their children's lives. And so they're able to bring a lot more of those resources to bear on, for their children, right? And that means, okay, well, maybe dad's busy this week, but mom's still there, so she gets to spend time. And, mom gets busy, then dad is spending more time, right? Or whatever the arrangement is. But they just have more resources, right? They can split tasks more easily than, say, a single parent. Even step families, right? While there are definitely great step parents, and I would never want to undermine that, the general rule of step parenting, according to the statistics and the kind of research, is that step parents don't invest emotionally or monetarily in their stepkids, right? They sort of hold them at a little bit of a remove because they aren't their own children. And again, your experience might be different. I'm speaking of kind of general statistics on the whole, not not the particulars of one person's experience. So again, if you had a step parent, I certainly don't mean to. That was wonderful. I don't mean to offend. But just to say, right, in general, step parents will invest a lot less. So strong parent-child relationships are found more often amongst married parents. All right, so another term that PETS uses is spiritual capital, right? And spiritual capital, like any other form of social science, capital is basically what is generated through particular behaviors, right? So spiritual capital, right, the individual and collective capacities generated through affirming, nurturing the intrinsic spirituality of every human being. Right, so families that regularly engage in religious activities together have higher spiritual capital, right? There's a more development of their spiritual capital. And capital is developed or generated by practicing and living religious behaviors. So the more you do things together as a family that are spiritual, the more spiritual capital gets generated. Okay, so divorce. So, we were talking about marriage and married families and some of the advantages therein. Divorce is pretty well known to weaken religious transmission in pretty serious ways. Okay, so what does this mean and why is this important? Okay, so amongst other things, right, a lack of consistent religious messages, right, where in a married couple, right, with biological kids, you have that reinforcing virtuous cycle. Both parents are sort of, hopefully, anyway, pitching the same message, right? They are saying the same things, and it's reinforcing. That kind of breaks down in a divorced family, right? You may get religious messaging from one parent or another. It may not be consistent, right? It's definitely a higher chance that things are going to go a little bit sideways. Obviously, one parent might have limited interactions with children, right? Depending on the conditions of the divorce and the reason, right? People may not have that frequent of interactions with their kids, and obviously that can be a problem. So that that can slow things down in, I think, major ways. Non-resident parent can't serve as a strong religious model, right? They aren't there anymore, and they don't spend as much time typically, right? Typically it's mom that spends more time with the kids, and dad is away. And certainly, and all the people I know, because I'm, at that stage in my life where the people I knew that got married, some of them are getting divorced. And yeah, most of the kids live with mom, and dad has sort of less contact with them. So they can't serve as a strong religious model because they're simply not there. Now they can, obviously, when they are present in their kids' lives, but it's not, always that consistent. And yeah, weaker child-parent relationship weakens religious transmission, right? So, kids may see their parents as inconsistent. They may see them as not trustworthy because of what happened, right? And this, is not, unfortunately, perhaps all that surprising. And so, it can break down a little bit. It weakens that religious transmission, it weakens that consistency, and it weakens those messages. All right, so kids, particularly in religious families, are more likely to do what they call sanctifying their parents' marriages, right? So basically, they see their parents' marriages as an outgrowth of their parents' religious faith. So marriage itself, right, the marriage itself is sacred in some way. So what can sometimes happen is they experience the end of that marriage as the collapse of the sacred in their lives, right? And PETS calls this sacred loss. And I think it's a really interesting concept, right? That they, kids, and especially kids of religious parents, can so invest in their parents' marriages a sense of the sacred that if anything happens to those marriages, right, if their parents' marriages happen to collapse, it puts their whole religious lives and spiritual lives in question, right? Rates of religiosity in religious teens generally declines after their parents divorce. So this is, a real concept. Now, okay, there's a bunch of things that can go on here too, right? And I know from kind of anecdotal, talking to young people whose parents have divorced, right, that they often feel rejected by the religious community they were in, right? I think this is certainly true of some Christian communities. I've definitely seen people report this, that, they were part of a religious community, a Christian one, and that their parents divorced, and then, they treated the parents, right, mom especially, as though that person had somehow failed in some kind of religious duty. And so they sort of end up getting halfway kicked out of their religious community, for something that may or may not be their fault, right? Like, it may be that husband was cheating or wife was cheating or something else, but religious communities don't always treat divorced people with exceptional kindness. And so this also, can contribute to it, right? If they're suddenly rejected, or they see their families as rejected by the religious communities that they thought they belonged to, this can hurt them a lot on a kind of deep and abiding spiritual level. So, I think that's kind of important to mention. But yeah, there's this investiture of their parents' kind of marriages as being somehow sacred, and that is really important, right? Because without that, a lot of stuff kind of breaks down. Okay, so I kind of mentioned this already, but again, according to Pets, step families are somewhat less able to pass on faith than natural nuclear families, right? Two married parents and biological kids. As I said, and unfortunately, and again, this might not be your experience, the ties between step parents and their stepchildren are typically less close than it would be between biological parents. Again, it's not to say there aren't great step parents out there, just they tend to, on the whole, invest less resources in their stepkids than they would be investing in their own children. Depending on the faith of the two parents, do they come from the same faith tradition? Do they practice faith in consistent ways? It's a lot harder for kids, for whatever kind of cluster of reasons, to invest step-family relationships with that same kind of sense of the sacred. Again, certainly things can happen. There are no absolutes in social research or social situations. But in general, right, young people are less likely to see these types of relationships as consistent, right? And again, less close ties. Religion travels well between close ties, and there's not a guarantee that people will be coming from that same faith tradition. Now, there isn't in first marriages either. Or that practices are consistent, right? It's very variable in step families. It gets more variable, than biological, married families. So, again, not to say anything bad about step families, just in terms of the statistics, they're less good at passing on faith. All right, so conclusion from Pets's piece. Parental religiosity matters most, right? That's what's going to lead to religious transmission more than anything else. Married parents are typically more religious than other family forms, for a number of reasons. Parents typically have the closest relationship with their children, therefore transmission of religious beliefs is most effective. And Pets finds that direct correlations between family structure and religious transmission is secondary to parental religiosity, right? So there's a stronger tie between family structure and religious transmission than parental religiosity. So, okay. There's nothing saying that divorced, unmarried, cohabiting parents couldn't pass on faith if they wanted to, right? But family structure does seem to matter a lot. Maybe those families tend to be less religious, tend not to send as consistent or be as consistent faith role models. Religious messages tend to be less consistent, right? If the relationship is not invested with that sacred sense, right, which marriage seems to have a unique ability to do, there can't be any sacred sense that gets attached to it. So young people can't see their parents' marriages as outgrowth of their faith. And so these relationships don't pass on faith as well, and they tend to develop less spiritual capital on the whole.